My name is Sienna Andrews, and I was 38 years old the day my mother's funeral turned into a business announcement. I was carrying a tray of lemon bars across the church hall when my sister's husband tapped his wine glass and told 60 mourners that his wife would be receiving my mother's entire $4.2 million estate and that the rest of us would get nothing. I set down the tray. I let him finish. But here's what none of them knew. The quiet man standing by the casserole table had a folder in his car, and what happened over the next 8 months would cost my family far more than money. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women tell the stories they lived through and how they came out standing on the other side. If you've ever been the one who stayed while everyone else sent flowers, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The reception was in the fellowship hall of First Lutheran, the same room where my mother taught Sunday school for 19 years. Folding tables, tuna casserole, lilies going soft in the heat. Half of Millbrook had come, because when a schoolteacher dies in a town of 6,000, the town shows up. I was refilling the coffee urn when I heard the chime of a spoon against glass. Derek Marsh stood in the center of the room in a charcoal suit that cost more than my truck payment, and he waited for silence the way men like him always do, like it was owed to him. On behalf of the family, he began, I want to thank you all for honoring Ruth. He paused. He actually smiled. And since there's been some confusion, I think it's kindest to be clear now, so nobody embarrasses themselves later. Ruth's estate, the house, the land, the accounts, all of it, roughly $4.2 million, passes to my wife, Colleen. She was the eldest. That's what Ruth wanted. A fork stopped somewhere. My Aunt Lorraine put her hand to her collarbone. Derek looked around the room, and then he looked directly at me, standing there in my funeral dress with coffee grounds on my sleeve, and he said the sentence he must have rehearsed in the hotel mirror. The rest of you get nothing. I didn't move. I have stood in rooms where people got the worst news of their lives, and I have learned that the body goes still before it decides anything. So I stood still, and I let him finish. Every word of it. At the back of the hall, by the casserole table, an old man in a gray cardigan set down his coffee cup and cleared his throat. Frank Delaney had been my mother's lawyer for 30 years and her friend for longer. He was the kind of man who wore a cardigan to a funeral because Ruth had knitted it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Derek, he said, I'm going to stop you there, as a courtesy. The room turned. The will you're describing is the old one. Ruth signed a new will 3 years ago, in my office, properly witnessed. Nobody announces estates at funerals, son. That's not how any of this works. Every beneficiary will receive formal notice by mail once the will is filed with the probate court. You could hear the furnace tick. Derek's smile stayed on his face but stopped working, like a sign left lit in a closed store. That's not possible, he said. Ruth would have told us. Frank picked his coffee back up. She told the people she needed to tell. The new will names an executor, and it isn't Colleen. It's Sienna. 60 heads moved at once, and I felt every one of them land on me. My sister Colleen was standing near the dessert table, and I watched her look at her husband. Really look at him, the way you look at a stranger who has taken your seat on a bus. Derek buttoned his jacket, which is what he does instead of breathing. Well, he said, loud enough for the room, we'll see about that. He said it like a man ordering something off a menu. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt the floor tilt a few degrees under my good shoes, because I had known Derek Marsh for 16 years, and I understood something the rest of the room didn't. He wasn't finished. He was just getting started. To make sense of what came next, you need to know what my mother actually had, because Derek only ever said the number, never the story under it. My father, Walter, farmed 90 acres east of Millbrook and drove a school bus in winter. He died 14 years ago, heart attack in the equipment barn, and left behind a life insurance policy he'd been quietly paying on since 1985, plus the land. Mom leased the 90 acres to Jean Kowalski next door and never touched the principal. She was a first-grade teacher who reused tinfoil. Over the years, the land alone climbed to about $1.35 million. The lake cottage Dad built came in around $620,000. The investments Frank helped her manage grew to $1.62 million. And with the house on Beckett Lane and the cash accounts, it added up to that number Derek loved saying out loud. $4.2 million, assembled by two people who clipped coupons. There had been an older will. That part was true. Back then, Colleen was the settled one. Married, mortgage, two babies, a husband in finance who talked about markets at Thanksgiving like weather. I was 25, single, doing travel nursing contracts in 3 states. And Mom, being practical, had left the bulk to Colleen, to hold for the family. Derek kept a copy of that will. I know because he referenced it the way other men reference scripture. And whenever the subject of money came up at holidays, Derek had a habit of mentioning, casually, generously, the amount we helped your mother with back in the day. He never said the figure. He never said the year. I used to wonder about that. The way you wonder about a door that's always locked in a house you thought you knew. Mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's 6 years ago, on a Tuesday, in a paper gown that embarrassed her more than the diagnosis did. I'm a hospice nurse. I have spent my whole career walking strangers to the edge of their lives and holding the door. I know what a long goodbye looks like from the outside. From the inside, it looks like this. A medication chart taped to the refrigerator, updated in pencil because the doses kept changing. Tea brewed at 5:40 in the morning, poured half full because a tremor makes everything spill and everything cool faster. Grab bars I installed myself on a Saturday. Her handwriting shrinking year by year, like a town scene from a plane climbing. 4 years ago, I gave up my apartment and moved into the house on Beckett Lane, into my old bedroom with the water stain shaped like Ohio, and I learned the new math of her body. She hated pity, so we ran the whole operation on dry humor. When the tremor knocked her cup over, she'd say, "Tell the county we're irrigating." One night near the end, when the house was dark and she thought I was asleep in the chair, she said to the ceiling, "Quiet isn't the same as gone." I didn't ask what she meant. I filed it away the way you pocket a key you find, figuring the lock will introduce itself eventually. Here's the part I want you to sit with. I never told anyone what those 6 years cost. Once you itemize love, I believed, it turns into an invoice, and I refused to hand my mother a bill. I thought love kept its own records. I was about to find out what happens when it doesn't. While I was learning the new math, my sister was in Charlotte, 7 hours south, living a life that photographed beautifully. Colleen married Derek 16 years ago, back when he sold insurance and called himself in finance. Now he called himself a wealth advisor, rented a house in a gated neighborhood, leased German cars, a golf membership he referred to as networking. They came home twice a year, Christmas and one summer weekend, and every visit produced enough photos to carpet 12 months of social media. Derek at the lake cottage, sleeves rolled, captioned Roots. Colleen and Mom on the porch swing, captioned My Whole Heart, posted from the airport on the way out. I'm not saying my sister didn't love our mother. I'm saying love has a maintenance schedule, and she outsourced hers to me. Derek treated every family dinner like a balance sheet review. He'd look around the farmhouse and estimate. You could watch him do it. Eyes moving over the crown molding, the barn, the shoreline, filing numbers. He liked to say, "We built something," about the Charlotte life, the way other people say, "Amen." And always, at some point, between the pie and the coffee, that line of his. After everything we helped your mother with back in the day. One Christmas, I finally asked Mom about it while we dried dishes. What exactly did they help you with? She wrung the towel once, set it down, and said, "That's not the story he thinks it is." Then Wheel of Fortune came on and she turned up the volume, which in our family is a legal ruling. There was a $30,000 story buried somewhere between my mother and that man, 12 years deep. I remembered it differently than he told it. One of us was wrong. 11 days after the funeral, the formal notices went out by certified mail, exactly the way Frank said they would. No drama, No velvet curtains, just the county probate court doing its paperwork. I got my copy on a Thursday and read it at the kitchen table with Mom's medication chart still taped to the refrigerator because I hadn't been able to take it down yet. The will was dated 3 years back, signed in Frank's office with 2 witnesses. It named me executor. It left me the house on Beckett Lane, the 90 acres, the cottage, and the accounts. It left Colleen our mother's jewelry and a $250,000 education trust for Emma and Tyler, her kids, 16 and 13, with a letter of explanation held at Frank's office. I sat with that page a long time. Executor. Some people hear a prize in that word. Nurses hear a shift assignment, because that's what it is, a fiduciary duty, a legal obligation to carry out someone's wishes exactly, whether or not your relatives scream at you. My mother hadn't left me money. She'd left me a post to hold. That night my phone rang, Charlotte area code, and I braced for the version of Derek from the church hall, the wine-glass voice. Instead I got something worse. Warmth. Sienna. Hey. Listen. Emotions were high at the service, I own that. A pause. Engineered. Family's what matters here. Colleen and I think the adults should sit down. Just us. Before lawyers turn this into a circus. He suggested Saturday. His hotel. As if it were a favor. I said I'd come, and I hung up. And I stood in my mother's kitchen with my hands flat on the counter. Derek shouting. I had a plan for. Derek gentle scared me. The Millbrook Inn has a conference room it rents to salesmen, and Derek had rented it, which told me everything about how he saw the meeting. Water glasses, a legal pad he never wrote on. Colleen sat beside him in a gray sweater, twisting her wedding ring, and hugged me at the door a half-second too long, the way you hold something you're about to set down. Derek opened like a seminar. Nobody wants a fight. Wills get stale. Ruth was sick. We all know she'd want her girls treated equally. So here's what we're proposing. We split it clean, 50-50, sign a family settlement, done in a month. Civil, private. He spread his hands. Or we do this the expensive way. I looked at my sister, not him, when I answered. It isn't mine to split, Colleen. I'm the executor. I have a legal duty to carry out Mom's will as written, and beyond that, this is the last thing she ever asked of anyone. The will says what she wanted. I've read it. I think you should read it too, along with the letter she left you. Colleen's eyes came up at letter, and for 1 second I saw my actual sister in there, the one who taught me to ride a bike. Then Derek clicked his pen, once, like a safety coming off. So that's a no. It's a no, I said. He nodded, almost pleasantly, and gathered the legal pad he'd never touched. 8 days later, a certified envelope arrived from a law firm in Columbus. Colleen R. Marsh, contestant, versus the estate of Ruth Andrews. They were challenging the will, grounds, undue influence. And the person they claimed had done the influencing, the person named on every page, was me. Before I tell you what was in that complaint, let me ask you something. One woman to another. If you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who knew the pharmacy hours by heart while everybody else knew the flight times, you already know where this story is going. Tell me in the comments whether you would have signed Derek's deal, because I want to know I'm not crazy. And if you're new here, subscribe, because what that man did next still keeps me up some nights. Now, the complaint. Maya Ortiz, the probate litigator Frank recommended, slid it across her desk and watched me read it, which I later learned is a thing lawyers do on purpose. The document was 14 pages, and it described my life, technically. It said the decedent's younger daughter had moved into the decedent's home and isolated her from family. It said she controlled the decedent's medications. It said she managed access to the decedent's physicians, monitored her phone calls, and procured a new will benefiting herself while the decedent was in cognitive decline. Every sentence was a photograph of my 6 years, taken from the one angle that made love look like a crime. The move home became isolation, the pillbox became control. Driving her to Columbus for the neurologist became managing access. I got to the end and my hands were steady, which surprised me, because a nurse's hands learn to be steady before the rest of her catches up. None of this is what happened, I said. I know, Maya said. It's what can be argued. Different thing. She took the complaint back and squared the pages. First rule, Sienna, and I need you to hear it. From today, you're a witness in your own grief. Everything you did for 6 years is now evidence, theirs or ours. We decide which. I asked her how a person proves she loved her mother. Maya said, with records. And God help me, I laughed. Here is how a will contest works in Ohio, the short version. The version Maya gave me with coffee going cold between us. The estate freezes. Nothing gets distributed while the case is open. Not the accounts, not the land, nothing. The estate pays its own defense, which means every billable hour comes out of the thing being fought over, like a body funding its own surgery. A contest has to be filed within 3 months of the notice, and Derek's lawyers had wasted no time filing, well inside the deadline. Undue influence, Maya said, is the standard play against a caregiver, because caregiving looks like influence if you squint, and juries squint. Best case, this resolves in under a year. Worst case, 18 months. Appeals. And the estate sells assets to cover fees. I asked which assets. She didn't blink. Liquid first, then real property. The house would be last, but nothing's last forever. I want to be honest about what that week took from me, because it wasn't money yet. Since the funeral, I'd been grieving the way I know how, quietly, on a schedule, folding her cardigans into boxes 1 closet shelf per evening. The contest took that. Grief became discovery. My sadness got a docket number and deadlines, and I started sleeping with a legal pad by the bed the way I used to sleep with a pager. One mercy. Frank called to say he was sending Maya the full estate file. Everything Ruth kept with him. There's material in there your mother prepared, he said in that careful lawyer voice. 3 years ago, she was a thorough woman, your mother. I asked what kind of material. Frank said, the kind you gather when you can see weather coming, and he wished me good night. The next hit didn't come through lawyers. It came through my work. My unit director at Marion General called me in on a Monday and closed the door, and I knew before she spoke, because closed doors are my native language. An anonymous complaint had been filed with the state nursing board. It alleged a boundary violation, a hospice nurse who had inserted herself into the care of a vulnerable elderly woman and then inherited that woman's estate. It was constructed carefully so the word mother never appeared, so that on paper I sounded like a predator in scrubs. 20 years I have carried that license. It is the only thing I own that I built entirely with my own hands. I had known Derek would come at the estate. I had not imagined he would aim at the thing I'd still have if the estate burned down. Here's what I did, and I want you to remember it, because it matters later. I did not wait to be summoned. That same week I self-reported to the board, voluntarily. I sent them the whole picture. Documentation that my mother's hospice care had been managed by an outside agency, Harmony Hospice out of Delaware County, with their own assigned nurse, their own charting, and that I had never once been her nurse of record, only her daughter, present in the house. I attached the agency's visit logs and asked for a full review. My union rep said I was overreacting. Maya said quietly, no, that's exactly right. Paper beats noise, but only if the paper gets there first. The hospital still placed me on administrative review, pending, which meant that in the space of 1 month, Derek had managed to make both my inheritance and my paycheck provisional. My sister called at 12:40 on a Wednesday night, and I answered on the second ring because some part of me had been waiting weeks for it. No hello. Derek says the medication logs look bad, sigh. He says his lawyers have people who read these things, and the dosage changes look bad. Her voice had wine in it, and fear under the wine. I said the dosage changes looked bad because Parkinson's is a disease of dosage changes, and any neurologist would say so in about 9 seconds. Silence. Then she said the thing she'd actually called to say, the thing I don't think she knew was cruel. You made it look easy. You never once asked for help. Not one time in 6 years. You never asked. I sat up in the dark of my old bedroom and looked at the water stain shaped like Ohio. She was right. I never asked. I'd told myself asking would shame her, that love shouldn't send invoices. And somewhere in all that nobility I had handed my sister a gift she didn't know she was holding. Permission. Permission to believe it was easy. Permission to stay in Charlotte. Because Sienna's got it. Sienna's always got it. My silence had been her alibi, and I'd notarized it myself. Year after year. I didn't say any of that. What I said was, I'm here now, and I'm asking you to read Mom's letter. And my sister, who once biked 4 miles in the rain because I'd sprained an ankle at the quarry, said, Derek needs this, Sai. Then she heard herself. 3 seconds of pure quiet, the kind after a glass breaks. The line went dead. I lay awake until the birds started, turning that sentence over. Needs. Not wants. Needs. Discovery is the legal word for turning a person's life upside down and shaking it over a table. Their firm subpoenaed 6 years of my bank statements, 6 years of Mom's, every pharmacy receipt, every mileage log, my work schedules from the hospital, the hardware store card I used for the grab bars. Boxes went out of the house on Beckett Lane in a paralegal's trunk, and I stood on the porch watching pieces of my mother's illness get carried away with exhibit stickers on them. There is a specific violence in seeing a shampoo receipt marked Exhibit 41. Lavender. The kind she liked because it didn't sting her eyes. Somebody in a Columbus office building was going to hold that receipt up and ask a question about it designed to make me look like a thief. I coped the way I cope, by being useful. I organized what they took before they took it. Indexed. Chronological. Because if my life was going to be evidence, it would at least be legible evidence. And that's how I found it. Going through Mom's kitchen calendars, the spiral ones from the drugstore she kept every year, I found an entry from 3 years back. October, a Tuesday, in her small, shrinking handwriting. Dr. Patel, 9 a.m., and underneath, in letters she'd gone over twice with the pen, the way you do when a thing has to hold. Tell no one yet. I stood at the kitchen counter holding a calendar from 3 years ago, hearing my own pulse. Dr. Patel wasn't her neurologist. He wasn't her internist either. I knew her whole roster. I'd driven her to all of them. I photographed the page, sent it to Maya, and put the kettle on, because that's what my hands do when my head is busy. Maya called back in 4 minutes. Frank's office smells like paper and pipe smoke, though he quit the pipe in 1998. He sat me down across the desk where my mother had signed her will, and he slid 2 things toward me. The first was a photocopy of a report. Dr. Anand Patel, Frank said. Geriatric specialist, Columbus. 3 years ago, the same week your mother signed the new will, she sat for a full cognitive capacity evaluation, 2 hours. Memory, reasoning, orientation, executive function. She requested it herself. Nobody suggested it to her. She called me and told me to arrange it. I looked at the date. 6 days before her signature on the will. I asked him why she'd do that. Put herself through an examination nobody was asking for. Frank folded his hands. I asked her the same thing. She said, and I'm quoting your mother now, because I know my son-in-law. The room went quiet enough that I could hear the wall clock she'd given him one Christmas. She saw it. All of it. 3 years out. The contest. The accusation. The word incompetent hovering over her signature, and she'd walked into a stranger's office with her tremor and her shrinking handwriting and said, Test me. Write it down. Notarize the weather. Then Frank slid the second thing across the desk, and my breath actually caught. A plain envelope, sealed, my name on the front in her handwriting, and beneath it, gone over twice with the pen. For Sienna. Only if they fight. Open it when you're ready to quit. She left instructions, Frank said. I was to hold it unless there was a contest. I turned it over. The seal was unbroken. I did not open it. I put it in my bag, and Frank watched me do it. And then he said gently, "There's one more thing in the will, Sienna. You're not going to like it." The thing I wasn't going to like was on page 6 of the will. One paragraph, standard font, quiet as a landmine. A no contest clause. In plain English, any beneficiary who challenges this will and loses forfeits whatever the will gave them. Ohio courts enforce those clauses. Frank had drafted it, Ruth had approved it, and I understood the logic. It's a fence. It's supposed to make challenges expensive enough that nobody starts them. But Colleen had already started one, which meant the math now ran like this. If they won, everything my mother decided got erased. If we won, if I successfully defended Mom's will, the clause triggered, and Colleen forfeited her bequest. Not just the jewelry, the $250,000 education trust, Emma's college, Tyler's college. 2 kids in Charlotte who still called me Aunt C on birthday cards would lose their futures as a side effect of my winning. I sat with the will in my lap and felt the whole shape of the fight change. Up to that moment, I had a clean story I could tell myself, defending my mother's voice against a man who shouted over it. Now her voice came with a cost attached, and the cost would land on the 2 people in this mess who had done absolutely nothing. "He knows about the clause," Maya said, when I brought her the page. She tapped the caption of the lawsuit, the line naming the contestant. Colleen R. Marsh. Only Colleen. Derek's name appeared nowhere on the filing. He filed it in her name alone. If they lose, she forfeits. Her kids lose the trust, and his hands are clean. He's betting you'll fold before you'll let that happen. Maya looked at me over her glasses. "He built the trap out of your own decency. I'd admire it if I didn't hate it." In May, Derek came to the house. He didn't come alone, and he didn't come to talk. I looked up from the garden beds Mom planted, the ones I couldn't let go weedy, and there was a silver SUV in the drive and a woman in a blazer taking pictures of the porch with her phone. Derek walked the property line like he was pacing off a purchase, pointing at the roofline, saying words like curb appeal and comps loud enough to carry. "Just getting a fair valuation," he called to me, friendly as a billboard, "for the settlement talks. You understand." Then, softer, just for me, as the realtor measured the porch. "You know you're living in an asset, right? Squatting, technically, some lawyers would say." I felt the sentence go in and find the soft place it was aimed at. The kitchen where I'd cooked her last Thanksgiving. My old bedroom. The refrigerator with the medication chart I still hadn't taken down. He'd found a way to walk up my mother's porch steps and turn the house I'd nursed her in into square footage. I did not argue. Arguing was the show he wanted, ideally in front of a witness with a real estate license. I went inside, latched the screen door, called Maya, and by Friday, we had a court order confirming the executor's exclusive authority over estate property pending resolution, which is the legal way of saying Derek needed permission to set foot on the porch again. Small win, paper over noise. But here's the detail I couldn't file away. After the realtor left, Derek sat in his SUV at the end of the drive for a long time. Not on his phone, not driving off. Just sitting, looking at the house. I watched him from the window and I couldn't read it. My deposition was in June, in a conference room in Columbus with bad coffee and a court reporter whose keyboard sounded like light rain. Derek's lead lawyer was a polished man named Whitfield who asked questions the way a scalpel asks questions. "Who selected your mother's physicians?" "She did. I drove." "Who managed her medications?" "Her neurologist set them. I filled the organizer." "Who was present when she signed the new will?" "Frank Delaney and 2 witnesses. I was at work. There's a timesheet." He kept his rhythm, hours of it, teeing up the story where every act of care was a bar on a cage. I answered short and true and let the transcript do its work. Then, late afternoon, when my shoulders had finally come down an inch, Whitfield opened a folder with the care of a man plating dessert. "Ms. Andrews, 2 years ago, you paid the account of Kowalski Roofing $18,000 from your personal savings, correct?" "Correct." The roof over the north bedrooms failed in an ice storm. Mom was sleeping under it. And 4 months later, you transferred $18,000 from your mother's account to your own. I said yes. Reimbursement at her insistence, and I heard how it sounded the second it left me. Was there a written agreement? A note? Anything the decedent signed authorizing that transfer? There wasn't. There was my mother at the kitchen table saying, "Take it back, honey. I'm not a charity case." And there was me, wiring it, because arguing with Ruth Andrews was a losing sport. Whitfield let the silence sit. Then, almost kindly, "Ms. Andrews, isn't that what they call financial exploitation of an elder?" And that, right there, is where they ended day one, with a court reporter's soft rain and that phrase hanging in the recycled air. July was the month everyone helpful arrived. Aunt Lorraine came with a peach pie and her verdict, both still warm. "Just give them half, honey. Your mother would hate this. Family is family." I told her Mom's will was the one voice in this fight that couldn't get louder. Someone had to hold it steady. Lorraine patted my hand and left the pie and her disappointment, and after that, her Sunday calls stopped. The nursing board was still reviewing. No timeline available. The estate's legal fees crossed $60,000 and kept walking. Maya was honest the way I'd ordered her to be. "We're positioned to win. But if this drags 18 months, if there's an appeal, the estate starts selling. Land first? Maybe. Or the cottage. Eventually, you could win the case and lose the house paying for the victory." And on the last Tuesday of July, a courier brought the new offer. 60-40, our favor, sign in 10 days, everybody walks. Derek's cover letter used the phrase "last offer before this gets ugly," which was funny, in the way emergency room humor is funny. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the settlement on one side and the salt shaker on the other, and the pen out of my bag, uncapped. Here's the truth, and I've promised you the truth. I wanted to sign. Not for the money math. For the exits. Signing meant Emma and Tyler kept their trust. My license stopped being a chew toy. The house stopped being a meter running. All I had to do was let a man who tapped a wine glass at my mother's funeral rewrite her last wishes at 40 cents discount. In the drawer to my left, under the placemats, was a sealed envelope. For Sienna. Only if they fight. Open it when you're ready to quit. My hand was on the drawer pull when the phone rang, and I asked Maya for one night. She gave me one night. Quick pause, from me to you, because this is the part of the story where everyone had an opinion about my life. Everyone kept saying, "Keep the peace," and nobody, not one person, asked who had been paying for that peace, in installments, for 6 years. If that arithmetic sounds familiar, if you've been the family's designated shock absorber, tell me about it in the comments. I read them. And stay with me, because the envelope in that drawer is not what I thought it was. Now, the night. I didn't sign, and I also didn't open the envelope. I stood in the kitchen holding it, and I couldn't, because her handwriting said, "When you're ready to quit," and opening it felt like signing a different kind of surrender, one addressed to her. So I put it back under the placemats, got in the truck, and drove out to Millbrook Cemetery in the blue hour before sunrise, the hour her tea used to go on. I sat on the wet grass by the headstone with my travel mug, and I gave her the report, out loud, the way I used to give her the gossip from my shifts. The lawsuit, the license, the 60-40, the pie-based diplomacy of her sister. Somewhere in the middle of it, I heard myself say her own words back to her. "Quiet isn't the same as gone." And sitting there, I finally heard the sentence from the other side. All those years I'd thought it was about her, a sick woman promising she was still in there. It was also about me. A quiet daughter is not a gone daughter. I had been quiet so long that everyone, Derek, Colleen, Lorraine, the whole town, had priced my silence at 0. That was their error. It had briefly become mine. I drove back to Beckett Lane, didn't sign anything, and told Maya one more day. At 9 a.m. she called anyway. "Sienna, tell me about that $30,000. Because discovery is a two-way street, and Maya drives it like a delivery route. While Whitfield was subpoenaing my shampoo receipts, Maya had gone through 12 years of financial records around the estate, the bank's statements plus the meticulous files Ruth kept at Frank's office. Standard diligence, she said. You follow every dollar that ever crossed the decedent's accounts. And there it was, 12 years back, the famous $30,000. The money Derek had spent a decade referencing at holiday tables, the amount we helped your mother with. Except the wire went the wrong direction. It left my mother's account, a teacher's account, and landed in Derek and Colleen's, earmarked in Mom's own checkbook register, in her pretty pre-tremor handwriting. Loan, D and C, brokerage startup. The year Derek left the insurance job to become a wealth advisor, my mother staked him. There was no repayment. Not one entry, not ever. He had taken her money, failed to return it, and then spent 12 years telling the story backward, until the whole family, including me, half believed my mother owed them. Maya laid the pages side by side like a dealer showing a hand. And it gets better, or worse, depending on your seat. 2 business loans in Charlotte delinquent, the lease on the German car, 2 payments behind, a brokerage hemorrhaging clients, the man announcing a $4.2 million inheritance at a funeral, Maya said, was a man drowning in front of 60 people, in a very good suit. I thought about Derek in the SUV at the end of the drive, engine off, just looking at the house. I'd wanted it to be greed. Greed is simple. This was a man who had told the success story so long it had become load-bearing, and the story was coming down on top of him. I felt one drop of something for him. One. And I want that on the record. Then Maya asked the question that mattered. Do we lead with this at trial? And I said, not yet. First I use it my way. Derek's way was an audience, a wine glass, a room he could work. So my way was the opposite of that. I asked Colleen to meet me alone. No lawyers, no husbands, at the diner out on Route 9 where Mom used to take us after dentist appointments. She came, which told me something. She looked thinner, and she ordered coffee she didn't drink. I put the bank records on the laminate table between us, turned so she could read them, and I kept my voice in the register I use for families in the hallway outside a hospice room. 12 years ago, Mom loaned you and Derek $30,000 for the brokerage, her register, the wire confirmation. It was never repaid, and he's spent 12 years telling everyone it went the other way. I watched my sister read. I watched her check the dates twice. Watched her thumb stop on Mom's handwriting. Loan, D and C. And I watched something structural give way behind her face. He told me your mother offered, she said quietly. He told me a lot of things. I didn't press. I slid one more page across, Maya's summary of the delinquencies, and then I said the only thing I'd actually come to say. Withdraw the contest, Colleen. Do it this week, before the clause is in play. You keep the trust, Emma and Tyler keep college, and I will never mention any of this. Not in court, not at Christmas, not ever. That's the whole deal. It's not a trap. It's the exit. Her hand was shaking when she set the page down, our mother's tremor, 30 years early, and she said, It's not that simple, Cy. Everything's filed through him, the lawyers answer to him. She stopped, hearing it, the shape of her own marriage out loud. She left without saying yes. 2 days later, I found out Derek knew we'd met, because that's when the last civilized thing between us died. He posted it on a Sunday morning, timed for after church, which I have to believe was deliberate. A long, sorrowful essay on his public page, titled The Truth About My Mother-in-Law's Final Years. It never used my name, which his lawyers surely appreciated, and it didn't need to, because everyone in Millbrook can count daughters. Isolated from the family who loved her. Medications controlled by one person. A will that appeared in the final years, benefiting the caretaker. Asking questions is not an attack. And under those sentences, the worst part, photographs. My mother in the last months, sunken and small in the recliner, pictures taken during those twice-a-year visits, pictures I'd assumed were for the family group chat, deployed now as exhibits in a smear. The town split like firewood. Casseroles stopped. 2 women from the church went quiet on me in the produce aisle, and one waitress at the Route 9 diner put her hand on my shoulder and said nothing, which meant everything. 72 hours, said the letter that followed on Tuesday, to accept 60/40, or their next stop was a criminal referral on the $18,000, and the phrase they chose was elder financial abuse. Maya asked if I wanted to respond publicly. We could. There were facts enough to bury him. And I sat with that temptation. I did. I'm human. I typed a paragraph in my notes app at 2 a.m. and it felt like drinking seawater. Then I deleted it, because a public brawl was his arena, his wine glass, his room, and I had spent 6 years learning a different kind of strength at a different kind of bedside. Wednesday, 7 a.m., I was at Maya's office before her paralegal made coffee. She looked up, read my face, reached for a legal pad. I said, "No deal. File it. We're going to trial." She wrote something short and underlined it twice. Things moved fast after that, the way a river does past a certain rock. Our formal rejection went in, trial date set for October, and the same week, 2 pieces of paper landed that changed the weather. The first came from the nursing board. Complaint reviewed, allegations unsubstantiated, no action taken, file closed. 1 page. It had cost me 4 months of sleeping badly, and it was the first domino that fell my way because of records I'd sent before anyone demanded them. Paper beats noise, but only if the paper gets there first. The hospital lifted the review and my director apologized in the break room with a coffee she paid for herself. The second piece of paper was already in my kitchen drawer. The night before trial, I took the envelope out from under the placemats and sat in her chair at the table, and I finally understood the instruction. Open it when you're ready to quit. It was never a consolation prize for surrender. She knew me. She knew the exact night I'd be sitting in her chair, the night before I had to stand up in public and be looked at, which she knew I'd rather die than do, and she knew that was the night I'd want to quit. I broke the seal. 1 page, the shrinking handwriting, gone over twice where it mattered. She'd seen everything. The tea at 5:40, the nights I sat in the hallway outside her door listening to her breathe. All of it, catalogued in the ledger she kept where nobody could subpoena it. And near the bottom, the sentence she went over twice, with the pen. Let them look at you, Sienna. Being seen isn't a betrayal of the care. It's the last part of it. I read it maybe 30 times. I slept 4 hours. Better than I had in months. At 6:10 the phone lit up. Colleen. Can we talk? Before court. I got to the Marion County Courthouse 40 minutes early and she was already on the steps. My sister, alone, in a coat too warm for October, holding her purse with both hands like a railing. I walked up and stood beside her, and for a second we were just 2 women outside a building where our mother's name was on a docket. "See," she started, and her voice had none of Derek's polish in it. It was the quarry voice, the bike in the rain voice. I read the letter. Frank gave me my copy months ago, and last night I read it, and I need to tell you something before we go in there. And then the glass doors caught the light, and Derek came up the steps with Whitfield and an associate, 3 suits moving like a weather front, and I watched my sister's spine do a thing I will remember the rest of my life. She stopped. She took 1 small step back and to the side, out of the space between Derek and me, and she folded, back behind her husband, eyes down. Whatever sentence she'd carried up those steps died right there on the granite. Derek paused next to me, adjusted his cuff, and leaned in close enough that only I could hear it, and his voice was pleasant, funeral reception pleasant. "Enjoy today. You'll still walk out of there with nothing." 6 years ago that sentence would have found the soft place, but I'd spent the night with a different sentence, in better handwriting. I looked at him, level, the way you look at a monitor, not a storm. Then you have nothing to worry about. We went inside in single file, family in name, litigants, in fact. Maya met me at the courtroom door and whispered the day's architecture. Patel testifies first, records after lunch. Then, only if you choose it, you take the stand. Nobody can make you, Sienna. Remember that. Nobody can make you. The bailiff opened the doors. The courtroom was older than everyone in it, oak the color of strong tea, a ceiling fan that ticked on every third rotation. Aunt Lorraine sat in the gallery, and Gene Kowalski in his good flannel, and half the church, distributed across both sides of the aisle like a wedding nobody wanted. Whitfield opened with the story his paper had promised: a vulnerable widow. A daughter who moved in and closed the doors one by one. Doctors chosen, pills counted, calls screened, and then, conveniently, a brand new will. He was good. He never raised his voice. He just built the cage bar by bar and invited the jury to notice me sitting inside it. Then, after lunch, Maya called Dr. Anand Patel, and the air in the room changed pressure. He testified in the mild, unhurried voice of a man who has explained hard things to families for 30 years. Yes, he had evaluated Ruth Andrews 3 years ago at her own request. A full geriatric cognitive assessment, 2 hours. Orientation, perfect. Memory, above her age norm. Executive function, intact. Reasoning, and here he glanced at his file. He wanted the quote exact, intact, and notably firm. She scored where you'd hope a healthy woman a decade younger would score. And when Maya asked why an ailing widow would seek out such an evaluation, uninvited, Dr. Patel said Mrs. Andrews had been direct about her reasons, and the court had her intake form, her own words, taken down verbatim by his nurse. Because I know my son-in-law. Someone in the gallery exhaled audibly. The ceiling fan ticked. Whitfield objected to the reading and was overruled, and I watched 2 jurors write something down at the same time. Derek stared straight ahead, jaw working, a man listening to his mother-in-law testify from a filing cabinet. Day 2 was the money, and Whitfield came for the $18,000 with the confidence of a man holding his best card. He put the wire transfer on the projector, my mother's account to mine, and said the phrase again: financial exploitation, letting each syllable cool on the jury rail. Maya took it apart with carpentry, not fireworks. First, the invoice from Kowalski Roofing, $18,000, dated 4 days after the ice storm, north bedrooms, emergency tarp, then full replacement. Then Gene Kowalski himself, filling the witness box like a hay bale in a phone booth, confirming he'd been paid by my check, my personal account, because the estimate came due while Mom's accounts were mid-transition to bill pay, and Ruth, he added unprompted, had stood on that porch and told him her daughter would be reimbursing herself the minute the paperwork settled, and if he heard otherwise, he should call her. Ruth ran a tight ship, Gene said, and 2 jurors smiled, because everyone in that county had been run by Ruth Andrews at some point, in a classroom or a church kitchen. Last, Maya entered my file with the nursing board, the one I'd opened myself, voluntarily, before any demand, complete with the hospice agency's logs showing I was never my mother's nurse of record. Is that the behavior? Maya asked the room, generally, of someone hiding money, or of someone who documents everything because she spent 20 years being audited by sicker days than this one? Judge Hollis tapped his pen twice, which I'd learned by then was his tell for interested. By the afternoon recess, the exploitation card looked less like a card and more like a receipt with a story attached, which is when Whitfield's associate touched Maya's elbow in the hallway. One final offer, he said. Tonight. We took the meeting in a borrowed conference room at 6 p.m. Paper cups, nobody sitting. The offer was simple, and it was smart. And I want you to understand exactly how smart. They would withdraw the contest entirely, tonight, signed before the courthouse opened. In exchange, the estate conveys the lake cottage, the place my father built with his weekends, appraised around $620,000. Everything else stays per the will. And because the contest would be withdrawn rather than defeated, the no contest clause would never trigger. Emma and Tyler keep the $250,000 trust. My license stays boring. The town gets no verdict to gossip over. I would never have to take the stand. Never have to sit in a box in front of half of Millbrook and itemize 6 years of my mother's decline out loud. All of it could be over by 9 a.m. for the price of one cottage and the small print nobody would read. That Derek Marsh walks away whole, story intact, having turned a funeral announcement into $620,000 of real estate through 8 months of siege. Maya gave it to me straight, because I pay her for straight. We are winning. Patel landed, Jean landed, the board file landed. But juries are weather, Sienna. I've lost sunny days before. And understand, if we win instead, the clause fires, and the kid's trust is gone. And that's on the record forever. Your victory did that. She put her pen down. Legally, taking this deal is defensible. Nobody who knows this file would blame you. I stood at the window with my cup going cold, and I could feel both futures in the room with us, and one of them was quieter. And God, I have always chosen quieter. That night I read her letter again at the kitchen table. In the morning I called Maya before her alarm went off. I'll testify. We declined the offer on the record in open court, so it couldn't hang over the jury room like fog, and then Maya said the words I'd spent 6 years arranging my whole life to never hear. The defense calls Sienna Andrews. The box was smaller than it looks from the gallery. I put my hand on the Bible my mother taught Sunday school beside, and I looked at a room containing every version of my town, and I did the thing she asked me to do in handwriting she went over twice. I let them look at me. Maya asked me to describe an ordinary day, and I didn't perform. I reported, the way I'd report at shift change. Kettle on at 5:40, because levodopa works best on an empty stomach, timed before breakfast. Tea poured half full, so the tremor wouldn't slop it. Served warm, not hot, because a tremor makes everything cool faster, and there's a temperature where she could hold the cup and still feel it was tea, and not a chore. Buttons in the last year, I said, take longer than you'd think, and we never once rushed them, because the buttons were where she told me about her students. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the fan tick. Maya asked why nobody, not family, not friends, knew the scope of it. And there it was, the question under my whole life, and I answered it under oath. Because I believed love that keeps receipts stops being love. So I kept none. I was wrong about that. The receipts were never the problem. I had to say the rest of it too, because the truth is load-bearing or it's nothing, that Colleen came twice a year, that the phone rang less every winter. I said it flat, no salt in it, and I heard something small break in the second row where my sister sat, and I kept going, because the letter said the last part of the care was letting it be seen, all of it. Whitfield rose for cross, and Derek, from counsel table, made a sound, half laugh, half objection to nothing, loud enough that Judge Hollis warned him, and 60 people watched the Polish crack. Whitfield asked one question too many. You expect this jury to believe you tracked nothing, wanted nothing, counted nothing? I looked at Derek when I answered. You counted everything, Derek. Every dollar, every point, every square foot. You counted everything except the years. The jury was out 4 hours, long enough for the hallway vending machine and I to become close. Then the foreman, a retired postmaster, stood and said the words in the dry courthouse grammar that undramatic people use for dramatic things. The will of Ruth Andrews. Valid. The contest dismissed. On every count. No shouting. Courtrooms don't sound like television. They sound like chairs. And breath. And one gavel used gently. I sat still while it landed. And what landed first wasn't triumph. It was her. The sense of her. Upright at the kitchen table with the pen she pressed too hard, finishing the last item on a list she'd started 3 years before she died. And then the bill arrived, because verdicts itemize too. With the contest defeated, the no contest clause did the only thing a clause can do. Colleen's bequest, forfeited, automatically, the jewelry and the education trust, $250,000 that belonged to a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, gone in the same breath that saved their grandmother's voice. I watched Whitfield explain it to Colleen in a whisper, watched her nod like someone absorbing a diagnosis. Derek came out of the courthouse into the October light and found the whole gallery already on the steps, the church rows, the diner regulars, every phone that had shared his Sunday essay, All of them watching a man who had announced $4.2 million at a funeral walkout, holding nothing but a settlement he'd refused and a story that had stopped working. He didn't look drowned, he looked evicted. Colleen passed me at the bottom of the steps, close enough to touch, and didn't look at me at all. I won everything I asked the court for. I drove back to Beckett Lane, parked in the drive, and sat in the truck for an hour before my hands would turn the key. The weeks after moved like paperwork, which is to say, slowly, then all at once. Probate closed. The fees were paid, $180,000 all told between both sides, most of it out of the estate. The tax a family pays for refusing to talk while everyone's alive. The house stayed the house. Gene renewed his lease on the 90 acres with a handshake on the porch Derek once measured. As for Derek, the ending was quieter than his beginnings. The brokerage wound down by Thanksgiving. The German car went back on a truck, and the creditors he'd been outrunning for years caught up in a season. He never was charged with anything. Life rarely invoices that neatly, and I heard he landed a sales job in Raleigh. His page stayed up. 2 weeks after the verdict, he posted a sunrise and the words, "Excited for this new chapter." And I read it standing in the kitchen and felt no urge to comment, which is how I knew something in me had healed over. The man told the whole town my family would get nothing. I let him finish, months ago, and life finished the sentence for him. The news about my sister came sideways, through Aunt Lorraine, who resumed Sunday calls as if July had never happened. Colleen had filed for divorce in Mecklenburg County. She was renting a 2-bedroom near the kids' schools. She had not called me, and I had not called her, and both of us knew why. In January, I drove to Columbus and did the thing I'd decided in the truck that hour in the driveway. Not with estate money. The estate does what the will says. Nothing more. I'd sworn an oath on that and meant it. With mine. I opened an education account for Emma and an education account for Tyler, funded from my own inheritance once it distributed. $125,000 each, the exact size of what the clause took, administered by a trust officer in Columbus. No conditions, no letter attached, no thread to pull. The kids would simply have college, the way their grandmother intended, without owing anyone a conversation about it, least of all me. I didn't do it to fix things with Colleen. Some bridges you rebuild, and some you just make sure the kids can cross without paying the toll the adults ran up. The trust officer asked if I wanted to be named, or anonymous. I thought about it longer than she expected. Then I gave my name, because I'm done being the anonymous kind of good. A week later, my phone buzzed once. Charlotte number, 2 lines, no greeting. They'll know it came from you. That was all, and it was enough. It's a Thursday in early spring now, first Thursday of the month, and my mother's kitchen won't hold another chair. 11 people, most of them strangers a year ago. The retired postmaster's wife, spooning out her mother-in-law's pills into a Monday through Sunday case while she talks. A dairy farmer who hasn't slept a full night since his dad's diagnosis. We call it the caregiver circle. No sign-up sheet, coffee's on, and the only rule is that here, the ones who stay get to say what it costs. Out loud, to people who already know. On the refrigerator, where a medication chart hung for 6 years, there's a calendar of first Thursdays, going over each date twice with the pen, an old habit from a steady woman with an unsteady hand. The kettle's always on by the second story. The kitchen light stays on late. Quiet lives here. Gone doesn't. If you take one thing from my story, take this. The people who love the loudest aren't always the ones who stayed. And the ones who stayed don't stop counting the years just because nobody else did. That's my story. 6 years of quiet. 1 envelope. A clause nobody wanted to win. If this reminded you of someone, the one who stayed, check on them today. They will not ask you to. And talk to your parents about their wishes, while they can still say them out loud. It is the single kindest paperwork in the world. If you know someone who needs this story, share it with them. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.